Section 9A. This section may have the most reoccurring AP questions that we have on all kinds of different subjects as we go. There's a lot of vocabulary and then broad ideas that we have. Some of this that we've recently gone through in a modified version here in 2020, and some that we are now less than a week away from the 2020 election that we're about to see here. The first thing for if you want to run for president, that's what most of the focus will be on president in this section. Later on will be with the representatives and senate. But our election day is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So it will be sometime between November 2nd and November 8th. That's been the way since sometime in the mid-1800s that we have had that. Before a person runs for president, though, there's a lot of things that end up happening there. You're going to have exploratory committees. You're going to have it where official declarations or the announcement. You're going to have fundraising. You're going to start campaigning. Then we will get to the primaries and caucuses that will go, which is sometimes called primary season. Then if you achieve the nomination, and you'll have the convention, we have the general election, and then the president is officially elected by the Electoral College in December. Now, we kind of split this up into two different campaigns, and for AP-wise, this is where you'll need to focus. The nomination campaigns with the primaries and caucuses, and then the general election campaign. That's it. For running a campaign, this is just kind of a quick summary of things. You're going to need to have a manager. You're going to have to have all kinds of help. You're going to have your own pollsters. You're going to have legal help. You're going to get media, social media help there. You need people that focus on fundraisers there. You're going to have experts and consultants on where to campaign, what issues to avoid as you're going along. Your staff, again, will include a lot of different people. Officially, there is no spin doctors, but that's where the staff will a lot of times have to act as a spin doctor. A lot of these organizers, what they're going to try to do is to get out the vote and drive. We don't have too many truly undecided, so a lot of times it's a matter of getting the people that are most passionate for you to get out to vote. The last several cycles, we've had a lot more of the invisible primary. We will have for 24 election, whether it's Trump or Biden, that it'll be the president, we're going to have discussion of who is going to be running for which parties soon after the election is over, and as we look to the future. And people will start going to places like Iowa and New Hampshire. They're going to get other things and get things long before we get to 2024 there. So again, you're going to get committees. You're going to try to find other powerful people you think might support you. You do an official declaration. This is where it's kind of a tricky part. When do you officially announce you're running for president? If you're somebody that's not real well known, you want to announce it early so your name is out there and you're the first, second, or third person that announces. And then when everybody announces, your name will be repeated and if you wait until later on and there's 10 people that have announced and you're 11th and you're not well known, you just kind of get lost in that. But if you are somebody that they're expecting to announce, you hold off. Like Hillary Clinton in 2016 kept on holding off, so she was always in the discussion, when is she going to announce and that there. So there is no one set time for when it is to announce. Okay, campaign strategy is pretty simple. Okay, what is your plan to guide you through this? And again, that invisible primary is where long before you get to Iowa and New Hampshire and we start primary season, there's a lot of things you have to do, visiting, trying to find other people in the party that you have there. Last few cycles we've had to have. In 2016, we had a lot of debates with the Republican side, and 2012 with the Republican side. In 2020, the Democrats were that way, where we had to have a lot of debates long before we got to the primaries. All right, you're going to need make sure that you know that's the difference between a primary and a caucus, and then we get to the primaries between an open primary and a closed primary. Caucuses used to be used a lot. They're not used as much. There are still some states that have them there, but before primaries, most of them were chosen by the caucuses. A lot of that got changed in the progressive era when political machines were being broken up, and we will end up having the direct primary to try to get around some of the party elites there. Again, around a dozen states today have it. The one that you're going to hear the most is Iowa, because it's the first. Now, the caucuses are different because it's not people come in and do one vote. It's like a closed primary in that you have to be a member of the party, but if you're Republicans, you all meet in a place there, and it's going to be several hours sometimes. So again, you just don't walk in and vote. You have to have a night that you're giving away a lot of time. Iowa's usually sometime in February, so on a Tuesday night in February, people in the towns will be going to churches or schools if you're a Republican or Democrat. The way the process works is then you will have it where, after you go through some of the organizational things, you will have it where someone nominates someone to be a president. So you have to stand up and actually say that I want John Smith for president. Here's the reasons why we should choose for John Smith. So then you go around and anybody that's nominated then, and then they close the nominations. Then the people in the room will then go and literally physically walk over into groups of who they are. Then there's going to be, for some of the lesser ones, they're going to be eliminated. We will then have a second vote, then a third vote, maybe even a fourth vote until it gets narrowed down there. A positive of this is the fact that if you someone that's not going to get the nomination, but you want to show them support in the beginning, you don't have just one vote. So you can vote for them in the first round, but then later on you can go vote for someone else. You will educate people, lesser known candidates especially. It may be good for the future. Somebody like Andrew Yang that no one knew about in 2020, but maybe in 2024, then he's not just someone new, and so people have an idea for it. The main negative that you have is it's very few people actually in this process, and the ones that are the most passionate, is a positive way to put it, or the most extreme, if you want to say, for negative. There, it's not very democratic in that way. When just, again, a very small fraction of the people of the party are the ones that choose it. For primaries, this is where you have a day that you go, and there's a primary day in your state, you go in and vote for the presidential candidates in here. A closed primary is only to party members. An open primary is you can choose your ballot. Now, I'm going to have a slide on here, and the reading that we did had a site that tells you where in the past decade we've had a lot of different variations coming off of this, and where Florida next Tuesday will be voting whether or not to do what is called the top two primary there, or jungle primary as it's nicknamed. So this is where we are in the process of a lot of changings that we have. Florida currently has a closed primary. So I'm a Republican, I go in and I present my ID, I get a Republican ballot. If I'm Democrat, I will then get a Democrat ballot. If I'm Libertarian, I don't get a ballot. I'm not part of that. So unless there's some sort of local race or school board that doesn't have to do with parties, you are then closed out in the closed primary if you're an independent, which is a negative. For the open primaries, though, if I walk in, I can ask for a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot. Some of the new versions are, if you're an independent, you can come in then for like a semi-open primary. And if I'm independent or libertarian and they don't have it, I can then ask for a Republican or a Democrat. Because a negative of the open primary is the opposing party can sometimes try to do something to mess up the results of the party that's opposite them. A runoff primary is not in the presidential primary, but in a lot of states like Georgia will have this. If you do not receive at least 50% of the vote, then there's going to be a runoff. We had that here in Citrus County when we had our school board members, where we had the primaries where most of the school board members were elected, but the one race that Miss Bryant was running for re-election, and she did not get 50%. So that is why next Tuesday's ballot has her and Miss Dottie that are running against each other for in a runoff primary, even though it's a general election then. You'll notice on the map the ones that are the brighter purple there are the ones that still use a caucus by Republicans. That doesn't mean the Democrats do. Every state decides how they are going to do it, and it doesn't have to be the same for Republicans and Democrats all the time. So some states might have a Democratic primary and a Republican caucus, or vice versa. You will notice, though, that the vast majority of delegates that are earned for the convention are now earned by primaries, not by caucus. Open and closed primaries. Now this is 2008. We have had, again, a lot of changes for small variations over the past decade. There, Florida, we are the darker green, which is we are a closed primary state at this time. Again, that might change in next week's amendment to the Florida Constitution here. I took right off of the one site that you had to do for your reading, and it gives some of the ideas of some of the new versions. In that reading, it was telling you like there's like 5 states doing this, 6 states telling what each of them do, and different variations of the partially closed, partially open. I can see an AP question coming about where you may not have to know the exact name of them, but the ideas of what are some of the variations of the open and closed. So that partially open, partially closed, top 2, those ideas that you have in here. Okay, the primaries and caucuses. Here's where you're going to have a lot of different writings that you can have where you're comparing them. Make sure you know which is which. Their primaries are seen as more democratic there because, again, it's not the party lead, but you still have it like for a closed primary. It's not as democratic. Some people say maybe it's too democratic because should we have more educated voters? If I vote in the primary, I just walk in, cast a vote, and turn around and leave. Or a caucus, it's going to take a little bit more time. Usually you're going to have more education. Primaries are not as extreme, although a closed primary is still more likely to have more extremists that are voting there, which as you're campaigning, you then have to go, if you're a Republican, to the more conservative side when you're running in the primaries, Democrats more liberal. It is seen as a training test where we have all these different primaries because it's a long primary season and then the election is going to be a long election. For caucuses, people will learn more about the candidates there. You can have a chance for lesser known candidates to be introduced there. And usually it's the most informed that participate. Again, we might say they're the most extreme, but it's also usually the most educated, the ones that care the most there. And this is where it's more of the test of the organizational strength there. So you want to try to find out who has the group that's going to do the grassroots, get out the vote runs, which will help you then in the later campaign. Okay, front loading is something that has been a big topic for the AP exam the last couple of decades, actually. Iowa traditionally is the first caucus. New Hampshire is the first primary. Normally, Iowa would occur sometime in the beginning of February. 2 weeks later will be New Hampshire. So for months before that, people are all over Iowa there. Then for 2 weeks, they're in New Hampshire. After Iowa and New Hampshire, normally we will have South Carolina and Nevada in the next couple of weeks that have caucuses and primaries. Then there'll come a time, usually near the middle of March, which we will have around a dozen states that will go all at one time, and that's called Super Tuesday there. So what front loading is about is where we have had in recent years, in Florida we were one of the biggest ones, that we will bump up our primary. Florida, though we're really important in the election, well, we won't have more of a say-so. So in 2008, Florida bumped their primary to be the end of January. So Iowa, which was supposed to be first, then moved to the beginning of January. New Hampshire, and it got all trumped in there together with it. So a lot of states are doing that because sometimes if you aren't early, you may not have too much of a choice, as a lot of candidates start dropping out after the first couple of caucuses and primaries there. Now, who has the advantage when so many states go early and load up there? That's where it's the idea that usually whoever's the most well-known beforehand there, or whoever has the most money for advertising it in here. Where I had the question was front loading needed in recent elections. And the last 2 elections, it wasn't really needed for Democrats, but it was needed for Republicans, the way they're set up. So there is no one answer to that. Another idea you need to know, both for the primaries and then later on with the Electoral College, is what winner-take-all is. Winner-take-all means that whoever's first place gets all the votes there. In the primaries, after the first few primaries and caucuses, the Republican Party is usually winner-take-all, or a hybrid system where the winner might take like 90% of them and the other 10% are done. So make sure you know that that's where the Republicans are more winner-take-all. Democrats are usually proportional. there. So if you win 55% of the vote, you get 55% of the delegates. The problem that you have that is sometimes you don't have a person that late can make up for an early there, but it does make it where later states have a chance to really mean more in the primaries. The negative of our system overall, not just primaries and caucuses there, but what way we have it. Going back to front loading, 2016, Trump had already won the nomination before California and New Jersey even had their primary vote there. This is a big criticism that you had, whether it's a caucus or a primary, but especially closed primaries, is there's too much for the extremes, the party loyalists, so people have to campaign more towards more liberal or more conservative depending on their parties there. We have a very low participation in the primaries, not just in the presidential years, but in other years that we have in there. And again, the participation is really low in a caucus because it takes so much time on here. There's a variety of things, and this is where a lot of these are what is talked about in your book for Chapter 9. Is there too much money? Is it too much dedication that you have? We don't get good candidates to run because of the amount of time on there. Is there too much media attention, or does the media not pay enough attention to what's the differences and their policies there? Is there too much interaction with the public? I mean, you got to go to Iowa and kiss babies. All right, it's a joke there, but or you go to New Hampshire and you're going to have multiple breakfasts where you have to go to these things. Is there too much stress on momentum? You got to win early. If not, if you don't win probably one of the first 4 primaries, you're usually seen there as dead in the water. So usually people are going to drop out of it. Should we switch to a different system of primaries is what's been debated. The 2 main types that we have are the regional primaries and then have a national primary. In a regional primary, you would see how the map, we have different regions. So it might be in 2024 that we go regions 2, region 4, region 1, region 3, or some sort of order. Each month have it there. It would make it where we're not having an individual state as important, but the problem that you have there is that there's a big advantage if whatever region goes first, whoever wins that region that may be from that area there has a big advantage because of front running and people that jump on the bandwagon there. A national primary would be one day everybody in a nation votes. Here the people that advantage with whoever's the most well known or has the most money for campaigning there, and you would not have a chance for lesser campaigns or those ideas that you have. Have on here some of the emphasis. Again, front loading is a repeat question. Make sure you know the difference between winner take all, proportional system, which party uses more. Know the difference between caucus, primaries, open and closed primaries. And again, I would today start with the different variations of the primaries in here. Here's where in 2016 you will notice for that one that for the Democrats, Hillary Clinton was barely ahead of Sanders. Ted Cruz was a little bit ahead of Trump, although there was none of them even had a third of the vote in 2016. 2008, this is where it shows the power of Barack Obama and Iowa, because Hillary Clinton was seen as the favorite for 2008 campaign. And when Barack Obama wins Iowa, people took notice and were saying, how did he win in that case? Meanwhile, for the Republicans, the person that ended up eventually becoming their candidate was John McCain, who was 4th place. There. And 2012 for New Hampshire, Mitt Romney, who would eventually win the nomination, where he didn't do as good in Iowa, he will do good in New Hampshire. 2016, you will notice that New Hampshire, that's where Trump has his first win there. Bernie Sanders will actually beat Hillary Clinton, but in that campaign, since it's next door to his home Vermont, it was not written quite as seen as much with that. This last election was a lot different. Things started out about the same for the Democrats there. Joe Biden was kind of stumbling along and early on where he was seen as the front runner. Everyone was an invisible primary going after Joe Biden. And after New Hampshire and Iowa, people were wondering, is his campaign dead? But then he does really good at South Carolina. He does good for Nevada. And then up and coming was Super Tuesday. And then we suddenly had for COVID. Some of the states still held their votes, some didn't. During that time, a lot of the lesser candidates dropped out of the race. Most all of them consolidated and gave their support to Joe Biden. And so what ended up happening is we did not have a normal primary system because of COVID-19, and the party consolidated behind Joe Biden. There was still some for Bernie Sanders, and eventually that will change as they thought that was the best chance for winning against Donald Trump here. All right, this is actually a lot of repeat from the chapter 8, but this fits into what's happening in the primaries. And there, after you have the primaries, those delegates that are chosen in the primaries and caucuses go to the convention. Historically, it was to choose the president. Today, we already know. Later on, it's to choose the vice president. We announced that before the conventions there. Today, it's usually used for the platform making. Still not even as much there. TV coverage compared to decades ago. Very little, where we usually only do about 2 to 3 hours for three nights. It used to be all day long for 4 days there. So what's actually done at the convention? It's a big party. It really is for the party loyalists. It's like a giant pep rally. We're all having a second here. This question: should we even have it? And after 2020, there's even more people saying no, we shouldn't. Taxpayers have to pay for the security for this. And again, we can do most everything that's done in the convention without it. There, will it come back after 2020? More than likely, yes, but maybe in a little bit lesser version. As we kind of see that, yeah, we don't need it as much. For the party organization, again, the head of it is the chairperson, who is in charge usually for 4 years. There's a convention every four years then that we have. At the convention, the delegates, most of them are for Republicans, are chosen by the winner-take-all version or hybrids in the primaries. Democrats have the super delegates. This has been lessened a lot after 2016, but just be familiar if you see the super delegates, that is with the Democrats. Their super delegates are high-ranking officials of the Democratic Party that are like governors, senators, representatives, mayors. They get an extra vote for the convention. The platform is usually made up. This is the idea to try to have for identifying with a party. Most Americans don't really know their candidates in depth. So that way when they vote, where they have party identity, so if they don't know the candidates, they're more likely to vote Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or whatever they kind of identify with. This example of where they have the different things. If you are a Republican or a Democrat, you do not have to follow the platform that you have. There might be some things different, and in fact, actually, usually if you are a candidate in a local area, you want to show that you don't always just listen to the orders from the party. This is where I said before, is it really necessary? After 2020, may not be as much. Just had this because Donald Trump gave the second longest acceptance speech here this last convention. The longest was also done by Donald Trump, which in the past we used to make fun of how bad Bill Clinton was there, but Trump's done the two longest since that time. All right, this is where we really get into some of your writing that you have. You have the nomination campaign with the primaries and caucuses. Here's the caveat that you have. You are trying to win those delegates, so you're trying to appeal to the party loyalists, the extremists in there. And so if you go too conservative for the Republicans, you might win the nomination, but you make it where you may not win the general election. The same thing's true if you're a Democrat, if you go too liberal. In history, the most conservative candidate we ever had was 1964, and you see Barry Goldwater won his home state of Arizona, and a few deep South states that did not like the idea of Lyndon Johnson with civil rights. Meanwhile, the most liberal candidate, George McGovern, there is a little blue right there for D.C. and Massachusetts there. In 2012, there was the Etch-a-Sketch comment that Mitt Romney's campaign manager had, which basically says, oh, you can just rewrite things, but it comes back to haunt you. We have seen that in the last month for our candidate, where Joe Biden has been criticized, where when he was in some states, he had made comments about ending fracking, but then in other states that it was important to their economy, he was trying not to do it. Once you get to the general campaign, though, the aim is to try to get the centrist, the moderate, the middle of the road voters, those that are up for grabs. They may be independent, they may be Republican or Democrat, but leaning one way or another, and they're not as die-hard for it. Those are the ones that win the presidential election. The Electoral College is what officially elects the president. 48 states and the District of Columbia use what's called a winner-take-all. Florida, we use that. If you are first place in the state, you get all the electoral votes. Maine and Nebraska use the congressional system, which I'll go over that in a short bit. If there is not a majority in the Electoral College, the House of Representatives will then decide. That's happened in 2 elections and sort of in 1876 there. When it goes to the House of Representatives, each representative doesn't get a vote. Each state gets 1 vote. So California may be dominated by Democrats, but they only get 1 vote in that election. Same's true with Wyoming. They only have 1 representative, but they get 1 vote. The 12th Amendment, remember with that, where that makes it where the president and vice presidential candidates, they run together, but they're a separate vote in the Electoral College. If there's not a majority in the Electoral College for vice president, the Senate is who decides in there. Again, that is a repeat question about that if they're not chosen, then about going to the House of Representatives to decide there. The election takes place in November, then the Electoral College votes in December, and then the President of the Senate, who is the Vice President of the United States, will announce the winner when they open the congressional session in January. Our winner-take-all system, this is again where most states have this, where if you have the most votes, you win all of those electors. Different states have different rules. We can have what's called a faithless elector, which is a person that will then vote for someone different than what the state had. Some states make that against state law, so you're not able to do that. Key thing that you need to know is this is where we have battleground and swing states. Some people will say that those are the only ones that matter, but as we'll watch a video from Prager there, which is a good one for about the Electoral College. Some of their stuff is biased, but that one actually is good to kind of point out that someplace that may not be a swing state right now could be in the future. Like they pointed out, West Virginia always voted Democrat until 2000, and those few votes helped to get George W. Bush elected in that. The biggest traditional swing states are Florida and Ohio, but each year is different. The map that I have up there is from June of 2020, where we are right now at the end of October. Arizona is now a toss-up state there. Michigan's seen as a blue seat. Georgia and North Carolina are actually as a toss-up state. So as we get closer to the election, things have shifted more towards the Democrats there. Here's where we'll see for 2000 that we look at this map. And you see the states that are red have voted Republican every presidential election since 2000. Those that are blue that have always voted Democrat. And so you notice these are basically the states that you could almost depend on. I say almost because Arizona is, right now it's actually pulling towards the Democrats. So Arizona may be one that, even though it's been Republican for every election since 2000, it may shift over here. So that's the thing. States that sometimes are solid one way may change there. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania used to always be more Democrat, and Michigan. In the last election, they voted Republican. Now, for the congressional district plan, Maine and Nebraska are the only states that use this plan. The state gets their electoral votes, and since you get the number of senators plus representatives, they get 2 votes. Whoever wins the popular vote gets the 2 senator votes. Then each district will then go. Now, Nebraska is a good example of showing this because this district, District 3, is very rural. More than likely will be heavily Republican on how it votes there. So that 1 electoral vote will go to them. This district here is sort of suburban. Nebraska suburban is a little bit different than other suburbs in there, so it may not be what you think in there. So this area makes, which size is only about 1/4 of the state, if that. Then this one small area is a whole other district. This is their more urban area. What ends up happening is, instead of battleground states, we end up with battleground districts. Right now, this is seen as a battleground district. Last week, President Trump campaigned there in Nebraska trying to win that one electoral vote there. So that's where people start concentrating on those battleground districts. Maine's more rural district is seen as a battleground district for them. A lot of states are looking to move to this there, where there's been a calls to end the electoral college, but some is to adjust from that. All right, when does it go to House? When there is not a majority. Again, the elections that occurred was 1800, 1824. I say 1876 sort of because it was going to the House, but then backroom deals made it where the Electoral College did sort of a last minute vote on that. So why do we have a list that sends it to the House? Why not the Senate? Again, think back to our founding fathers. The Senate was originally not elected. The House of Representatives is based on population. It's supposed to be closer to the people. So that is where we come to that side. Criticisms of the system in here. Now you'll see there's asterisks on there. 25 years ago, Republicans were trying to end the Electoral College. Now it's Democrats that want to there. Because it was traditionally seen as there's too much advantage to large population states, urban areas. But as we have seen twice in 2000 and 2016, where the idea that a person can win the popular vote but lose the election, the electoral vote, we're seeing here where some of those urban areas actually per vote don't have it. California, they have all their representatives, and yes, they have 55 electoral votes there, but they only have 2 senators. Meanwhile, Wyoming has 3 electoral votes, but they have 2 senators. So per person, the person in Wyoming actually has more voting power in that way. So the population may not. Another criticism we have is realistically you could, if you were to win the 11th biggest states, you could win the Electoral College without any of the other states or DC. Now, not very probable that anything like that would happen, but that's why you're going to concentrate on the big states. You're going to especially concentrate on the big states that are swing states. Why do we have the Electoral College? Our founding fathers set aside. That Prager video will actually tell a lot of the reasons why there. We did not mean to have a pure democracy there. There are things that used to be too big that you couldn't do a count that way. There are federalism ideas there that give power to the states in there. And why hasn't been abolished? We need to have an amendment to abolish it. It's really hard to get an amendment to the Constitution. You're going to have 2/3 of the House and the Senate. You're going to then have to have 3/4 of the state. A lot of things are looking is that like more states will turn and do other things to change things that won't have to actually go for the changing the Electoral College. Again, the district plan is something that some other states are looking to do. All right, so what would happen if this case, if we were to have a 269-269 tie? So you see where the states are. It is possible. Not very probable, but there. Who's going to then decide the president? You should be saying the House of Representatives. Who's going to decide the vice president? It is the Senate then that decides the vice president there. All right, a couple terms that you need to know. The first one is coattail effect. This is where for presidential candidates when they have people win on their coattails. Obama had a lot of people from his party there. You get people excited about a candidate and then they don't know about the lower ticket candidates, so they vote Republican or Democrat. Mid-year, off-year elections are the elections in the years that aren't presidential elections. We will have a lot more about that in 9C there when we're going to concentrate on the Senate and Republican and the representative elections. Mandate theory. This is where the winner believes I won. Everybody wants to do what I want. It is very misconstrued. Did Donald Trump win in 2016 because everybody wanted to build a wall? Or did he win because people were voting him more than Hillary Clinton, or at least in the electoral vote it was that way? 2008, all right, did Barack Obama win because everybody wanted, and he had a mandate for health care reform? Or did he just have more people voting for him than John McCain in his? So this is where politicians like that theory, political science don't agree, because again, a lot of times, especially in recent years, it's not you're voting for a person but against a person. If Joe Biden wins next week, more than likely it's not because of the ideas of Joe Biden, but he's not Trump. You see this chart with the Caucuses effect. There are some of the elections, like you might see, well, 1960, Kennedy didn't do it. Kennedy, that was a very tight election where it was said that one vote different in every precinct would have made Nixon president. Bush in 2000 did not win the popular vote. Clinton in 92, that is where we have a third party candidate there. These other terms in here are pretty straightforward. A maintaining election, majority party maintains power. Deviating election, the minority party gets support from groups within the majority party. At this time, which may be different next Tuesday, but at this time, that's kind of what we look like might end up happening here, because there are like the Lincoln Republicans and others that are kind of joining with the Democrats to support Biden. So that might be what ends up happening. Realigning is when we have groups that switch. De-aligning is when people are not doing party loyalty. And the critical elections we've had before, House, Senate, and Executive all change at one time in here. The historical elections, I'm going to go quickly through this. You don't have to know them, but these are the ones you need to be familiar with from history. There, you may have to pause on the slide as I'm going through pretty quickly there to go back. But these are ones, again, to be familiar with. If you were in my AP US history class a few years ago, for AP US history, I used to have 25 elections that they had to know in here. But first one is 1800. The impact of this one was after the Burr controversy. We will create the 12th Amendment. This is a critical election as the House, the Senate, and the executive branch all go from Federalist to Democratic Republican time period. The House also selected the president in this. 1824, once again, the House chooses the president and what would be the collective bargaining. A history term you need to know for government here is in the 1820s, we will have more universal suffrage. That is when a lot of states will take out the land requirements. 1860, that Abraham Lincoln Civil War thing there, but we will have a critical election as House, Senate, and executive branch will all go from Democrat to Republican. 76, the key thing here is that it was going to the House, and then there was backroom deals to make the compromise of 1877. That's one that's more history that you have. 1896, this shows the third party effect where the populists gained so much and their effect that they would have on the Republicans and Democrats in the next decade and the populist time period, or the progressive time period. Also, the Populist Party, the idea of populism. We have some things like the first modern campaign where Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie joined together to try to go against William Jennings Bryan and support. They're almost like a modern day PAC. 1912 will show the effect of the third party. The states in green are where the Bull Moose or Progressive Party will end up winning those states. They're the best success electorally by a third party. 1932 is another critical election, which the Democrats will take over the House, Senate, and executive branch from the Republicans there. It's FDR's first win. The 20th Amendment will come about because when FDR wins, he will not help out Hoover from the time of the election to the inauguration, which was in March. The 20th Amendment will shorten that lame duck period and move the inauguration to January. 2000 election. This is where it's known for the recount. We'll have the Supreme Court Bush versus Gore that we will go into when we review our cases, but in the United States Supreme Court by a 5-4 decision will tell the Florida Supreme Court that no, all right, we're overruling you, where the Florida Supreme Court had said in a 7-0 decision that Florida obeyed its laws. The law for Florida said that there would be a recount if the vote is within 0.5%. So there was the manual recount. You see the person staring at it there. This is where they would look at what were chads. The chads are little pieces of paper. A hanging chad are when they're sticking to it. A dimple chad is like this one, that is where they poked it but not all the way through. You would have these machines that counted the ballots with that. A butterfly ballot is what we had for Palm Beach County. You see here it says George W. Bush pointing there, Pat Buchanan here, Al Gore here. What ended up happening is Pat Buchanan got a lot of votes, and what happens is probably a lot of people got confused. So Palm Beach County was trying to say that the Buchanan votes were people that actually meant to vote for Al Gore. They just pushed the wrong place. The court said no, there's arrows that you could have this. So that's one of the mistakes that kind of made a difference with Al Gore not getting elected. Another, Ralph Nader, you'll notice here, a lot of environmentalists that thought Al Gore was going to win voted for Ralph Nader to try to send a message to Al Gore to be more environmentally. That will end up being where George W. Bush, after they will count, even though it didn't officially matter on that, somewhere between 500 and 800 votes, depending on the count, will say that Bush would have won anyways.